on, guys? So this is going to be the completion video of my first upgrades I did on the board. I did 3 upgrades. One of them was introducing power to the board. Second being basically making my own patch cable for the very first time using a brand called Lava Cables. The third was introducing the idea of using a effects loop with pedals that are not built into the Firehawk. And the third was basically figuring out a way to modify the board physically to hide the cables instead of coming out in front to come up from the board. The video that I made for the work didn't come out as planned. I had a lot of GoPro shots that I had to delete only because the routing and all the wood chips covered the GoPro lens, and so that kind of ruined the shots. I was working through a lot of changes on the spot, things that I thought would work, wound up not working. And so I had to sit and really think about how to do certain things, rework some projects. I even had to cut new pieces of wood just because the ideas kind of fell through and I didn't want to leave mistakes on the board. So that was kind of frustrating, but that is the idea of making prototype boards. The second thing was introducing power. The harness that I got was a prototype from a company, and it was something that was the very first time he was making them. He was thinking about making them himself, but there was no want to make them at the point until at least I contacted him with the idea again. The cord that was made, the power, the switch, all the different harnesses, that all works flawlessly. So when I turn the board is on. The one thing that I have, and it's an aesthetic issue, is the indicator light that is connected to the power. At times when you tap the board, the light will flicker or the light will just go off, but the power is on. So that is kind of an annoying factor when you have something built into the board and you want it to work right, and it doesn't. The second issue I had was lava cables. I've done electrical work for years. I have made cables before, and I've never had issues making patch cables before like this. So I had made, I had ordered 10 feet, 10 connectors to make 5 cables. And out of the 10 connections, only 2 of the connections actually took the way they should have been in the beginning, which is you strip the wire, you easily push it in, you hear a click, you twist it, put the cap on, and you're done. So I made all the connections, and the one thing I ran into quickly was 10 feet was really cutting it close. I end up having to measure every cut exact, and even then it was kind of tight. So that was something I wasn't prepared for, even the small distance, but the cables running back and forth, ate up the inches. So that was a learning curve I wasn't prepared for, only because I thought that was at least a close distance. But what I did find with the patch cable is that the connections were breaking quite easily. And anyone who's worked with solderless connections know that once you insert the cable wire into that connection port, and if it breaks, that connector is done. You basically have to cut the wire and restart all over again. And that's what I went through basically with this stuff. So I made all the connections, put everything together, tried the board on, and I heard a lot of noise. More than I actually thought there was needed. I checked the gate on the Firehawk, I checked my connection, I thought it was a pod issue. I started even messing with my patch settings. And I found out that it wasn't any of that stuff. So in a hunch, I just picked one connection at random and opened the back up and just make sure it was a snug fit, and the damn cable came right out. And so having breaks in the line was introducing feedback and noise into my signal chain that even using the gate could not shut up. So that was super frustrating, even spending the $70 for the cables, spending all the time putting the connections in and not having to work is kind of a punch in the gut. So as of right now, that is still a broken thing, and I'm even debating on going with a different idea, which is using Planet Wave's connection set, and that one is stripping the wires and using a screw connection. And so I'm thinking about going that route. As of right now, I probably will never buy lava cables again, only because I had so many issues with using their product. With the amount I have right now, I probably will just cut the ends, order new connections, and then reuse what I purchased I spent the $70 for the cables, and use them later on in the board in a different manner. But in the future, I probably will never buy them ever again. The other addition I did was modifying my board. So originally, I had planned for the cables to come out the back and just make a nice simple loop all the way in front of the Firehawk to make the connections. What I realized is that my idea was to make these cool decals in the front, so when I'm on stage and people are looking at me, they see really cool decal. The one thing that was ruining that is, excuse me, is having cables protruding from the wood. So the idea was, just drill holes and have them wires come up. Well, if I drilled holes, when you add those solderless connections, you cannot remove those connections. So what I found out was, if I were to, let's say, move the wires, I either have to A, cut the wire, or B, cut the wood and remove the wire. And so to prevent issues like that, I decided to just cut a nice small U into the front of the face of the platform and introduce the wires that way, so I can unscrew the backs or the sides, lift the board up, reshift the wires, push the board down, rescrew them in, and that wound up being a fairly good idea. It kept the wires nice and straight, kept them free from tangles, and I think for at least routing purposes, it was a really cool feature. The one thing that I definitely ran into that I thought I could cheat was not having a router, and definitely making this process, this whole project, and trying to do things by hand, it doesn't work. And so I had to learn how to use a router. I've used them years before, but just haven't since. And so figuring out the depth and how I wanted to chip things away. Definitely how to plunge and make the cable routing holes for the heads in the middle of the board was a thing that was a must. Cutting slots out didn't work, and making sure you cut the right size of hole and the right position on the board was super important. So it took time to figure out that stuff. But when I did, it worked really well, and having a tool like a router it's priceless. It makes the process a lot easier, it's cleaner, and in the end you have a better looking project. The other addition that I was kind of not expecting to do was removing a pedal and adding a new pedal. In the past, I had ordered a Mimic pedal, and I wanted that pedal introduced because it was a doubler. The videos that I saw in the audio samples that I was looking at or listening to was something that I wanted to introduce onto stage and in my recordings. I have a plugin that I do in recording, and I wanted something to mimic that sound. So I ordered the Mimic. I think the pedal is really cool. However, after the endless amount of tries and different ideas and routings, and I finally sent a message to TC Electronic, and I said, hey, this is what I'm doing right now. I can't get the same sound. Help me. And what it came down to is that this pedal optimally works best when you have another amp on stage, and you literally have to have a separate signal going to another amp, instead of basically what I was doing, which was put the pedal in, the first chain goes into the normal loop in the guitar, and then I have the FX coming out making a serial loop going back into the board. It doesn't work that way, and I've tried multiple ways. I've tried using just the mono line into the board, and what I came out with is I wanted basically creating a limiter and a gate unintentionally on the board. So whatever I would do on the pedal patch, I had multiple gates. So I had a volume on-off control on my guitar. I had the pedal. I have the amp. I have the effects loop. I have all of the effects that have mixes in them. And then I have this gate mix on the Mimic. And what I found out is I had basically spent days working on this one patch for the stage. Crafted it, loved the way it performed with different effects starting on and off. and got the new pedal in. I threw it on the board, went to rehearsal, and I was just like blown away because the sound that I had worked on in the studio was not the one in rehearsal. And so I'm trying to figure out, like, was it my cables, was it my guitar? And I was super frustrated, and I had people, trying to figure out, like, what's going on with you. And then I decided to turn the Mimic off and just figure out, like, simplify things. What is wrong? And as soon as I turned off the Mimic, the entire sound came up. And so they had to go to the board, turn the board down. And that's when I realized having the Mimic wouldn't work in front of the board. And I thought, maybe as a last attempt, let's try to throw it in the effects loop and control it that way. Even if the lava cables worked properly, do I think the Mimic would work? Absolutely not. Even TC Electronics has a statement when they texted me and said, basically, this works with another amp the best. You have to have two separate signals when the signal comes out of your second amp and it gets pushed to the front of the house speakers. You're going to have that sound. And I have been speakerless for about 8 years, and I have no inspiration or aspirations to get another amp at all. I like being digital, like being free of the weight and the space. So I'm never going to buy another amp, at least at this point, in this where I'm at now. So pedals are goner, and so I'm tossing out finally. It's been taking on my board for the last year, and it's gonna be gone. What I am introducing in its place is going to be rearranging my polytuner, because I'm finally going digital with a wireless connection. And what I've decided to go with is a pedal that has been talked about notoriously. It's been proven, and it's well within my budget, at least for this first round, is a Line 6 G30 wireless digital system. And so I'm getting that in the mail Monday, and what I want to do is arrange the wireless system above the polytuner, and that's for two reasons. One, it's something that I don't want to be touching. It doesn't need to be in front of my board. And two, when I'm in my studio, I'm not going to be using my digital wireless. I just wanted to keep charging batteries just for what I do in the studio. So I want to have the option of removing that connection and using a hard line with guitar cables. But when I go from the studio to the stage, reconnecting that connection into the polytuner and having my pack on. So it's going to be this really quick wiring movement, nothing too crazy. But that is where I'm at with the board so far. And I definitely have a few suggestions for those who are basically crafting up their own board. And so we'll get to that next. Alright, so my suggestions to people who are making their own board. If there's one tip that people are not wrong about, is sit down and think about what you're doing. I am lucky enough that I have very little items to rearrange and to figure out my signal flow. And the signal flow that I do have, it's all digital in the board software. But if you are making your own pedal board and you have multiple analog pedals, you're going to have to take time and figure out how the flow of your board is going to go and organize it in a clean manner. You want to make sure that your foot switches aren't next to each other, and the ones that are next to each other, make sure that when you touch the foot switch, you're not adjusting knobs. There is an insane amount of planning that goes into some of these boards, and I had a simple issue of length and connections on my board. I can't imagine trying to make an analog pedal board of 5 or more with cable routing and not having, a bunch of issues where the board is basically rendered useless until that's fixed. Be on your toes when you're building this project. Have at least 2 ideas when you're constructing the wood and how you're routing your stuff, and be prepared to switch that idea out and think on the spot. Don't underestimate power tools. It's silly. It's just, they're made to make life easier and make jobs faster. If you have a friend or borrow tools, but definitely think about how you're constructing the pedal, and then on top of that, think about how you can adjust it in the future. And I would say, if you make a mistake on the board, try to fix it. Don't leave mistakes on the board. At least you spent all this time planning, all the materials and all the money to make it look presentable. Don't just throw down crap. And that's kind of what I went through with myself. I had to go buy power tools, buy some new material, recut the items that I had screwed up, and re-put them down. And in the end, it turned out way better and more cleaner than I originally had planned. And overall, just keep thinking about what you want to do and where the board can go in the future. I know I'm thinking about making at least a bottom cover for my board, only because I want the cables not to be shown, and when I introduce a power brick, I want that power brick to be covered and have no issues. And I'm even thinking about making when I make the second prototype, a bottom lid that opens up and a top that is actually fully flat and not have slats. The original idea that I made, I wanted something antique, so I wanted that basically a barn look. 3 pieces of board, natural, nice and clean. But once you have Velcro on, once you have the pedals on, you can't see any of that, so it doesn't matter. So that's what I discovered. So simple things like that, design flaws that you were trying to go for. Once they're covered up, it doesn't matter. But overall, yeah, I mean, watch different videos. At least have drawings of different things you want to do. You do your research, and then you buy materials. Make sure you're buying at least the best priced items. And if you're ordering patch cables and you're doing patches yourself, do yourself a favor. Order at least a half more of what you need. So if you need 10 feet, order 15. If you need 15, order 20. Because I definitely ran into that issue where I was really cutting things tight and making things work, where if I had a little more length, it wouldn't have been a factor. That's the end of my video. If you guys have any questions, please post them below. You can feel free to message me. I'll reply to you guys back. Until later, this is it. Thanks. Bye.